Hey folks, today I'd like to talk about the chart of Kevin McCarthy, the recently confirmed Speaker of the House for the new Republican Congress. So for anybody who's watching CNN or other similar media, earlier this month, there was lots of opportunity for amusement, shock and awe, I guess, as well, as the House went through an unprecedented 15 rounds of votes in order to confirm Kevin McCarthy for Speaker of the House. And during a lot of this shouting and shoving and horse trading and so on in order to make a deal, I was reminded of that old George Carlin line, which is that when you're born, you get a ticket to the freak show. When you're born in America, you get a front row seat. So it was something to behold for a while. So McCarthy now is Speaker of the House. But, this is a very, fractured Congress in a dazed and divided America. His job is not going to be easy. It's a Sisyphean task. As fast as, he's got one QAnon-inspired representative pushed aside, another one will lurch into her place, and he'll be fighting a rear guard action throughout the balance of his term. Anyway, be that as it may, what's interesting is the horoscopic correlates to this. So let's move over to McCarthy's chart and have a look what's going on there. So here is the horoscope for Kevin McCarthy. He was born January 26, 1965, 12:40 p.m. in Bakersfield, California. So he went to university in California. He got a BSc in marketing. He got an MBA. He worked on and off as a firefighter during those years. And in there was 2007, he was elected to the House of Representatives. So he's had 15 years of a political career on the national front. So let's have a look at the chart. So he has Taurus rising with Rahu in the first, Rahu Ketu axis running through the first and the seventh, a debilitated moon in the seventh house, Swarashi Saturn in the 10th, and a tight conjunction which constitutes planetary war, graha, yuddha, with Venus and Mercury in the 8th. Okay, to each of those in their appropriate order. So first and foremost, scan the Kendras and see what you see. And of course, what's dominant there is Swarashi Saturn. So this, all on its own, creates a single planet yoga, one of the Mahapurusha yogas, which is in this case called Sasha Yoga, courtesy of Saturn. So Saturn's strength is significant here as Lord of the 9th and Lord of the 10th. In the 10th, this is very supportive for any kind of governmental work. For instance, the 9th house is indicative of legislative activity, creating law. And of course, the 10th house has always been associated with command and control operations, the very administration of government. So this is a very powerful Saturn, and in part, it's what makes him a conservative, of course, because it occupies the angles and has a dominant influence. So Saturn is clearly the strongest planet in this chart, and it's always illustrative to, look at any horoscope and, pick the low-hanging fruit, whether they be the strongest planet or the weakest planet. So in this case, for McCarthy, the weakest planet for him is the moon. Now, very obviously, it's debilitated in Scorpio. What's less obvious is that it's also fairly dim of light. If you look at the degrees, moon at 10 degrees Scorpio, sun at 13 degrees of Capricorn, that is a mere 63 degrees away from the new moon phase. So basically, 5 tithys, 5 daily movements of the moon will bring us to the new moon position. So in the sky, the moon is fairly dark, and it is definitely debilitated. Furthermore, it's hammered by malefics. It's on the Rahu Ketu axis, which is problematic, and it is aspected by Saturn, and there's nothing to relieve it. So this is a weak and afflicted moon. Now the moon rules the third house. Among other things, it indicates courage, and notwithstanding his period of employment as a firefighter, we've had occasion to sort of question the level of his courage. For instance, think back 2 years ago, the Capitol riot, January 6th, that day or the next, McCarthy was very clear in saying that, Donald Trump was the instigator for the Capitol riots and was to blame for that, and he should be held to account, yada, yada, yada. And a week passed, and, he fell silent, and then, before the month was out, he was hastening off to Mar-a-Lago, to kiss the ring of Donald Trump and beg for his forgiveness. So, he's been, kind of held hostage to this other major, moon in Scorpio native known as Donald Trump. More on that later. So back to the moon. As a focal point for, problems and issues, we could say the moon in the seventh house also draws, close attention to the nature of relationships, alliances, deal making, negotiations, diplomacy, any and all of these things that are ruled by the seventh house. Now, first and foremost, this, raises some questions about, personal relationships. And all we know about personal relationships is that he's been married for maybe 20 years or something like that. Back in 2015, it was alleged he had an affair with, another member of the House of Representatives at the time. And well, that's blown over, and he remains married. So we can assume, that was put behind him, and they, made up, and his marriage continues. However fragile that might be, we don't know. It's none of our business. It does have some bearing, though, the whole nature of relationships upon his public role. Further on that, back in that era, 2015, he was running Venus Mercury in terms of Dasha Bhukti. So let's look at that Venus and Mercury relationship. So they are in graha yuddha. So technically the definition, if two true planets, so we're not talking about sun or moon or either of the lunar nodes, we're talking about true planets, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, or Saturn. If two of those lie within 1 degree of zodiacal longitude of each other, that will constitute planetary war. And although there is a protocol for determining the true winner, and it usually hinges upon A, brightness, B, elevation, declination, and or speed. And you can usually determine a winner based upon those factors. And Venus always being brighter than Mercury will win in this case. And as it turns out, it has greater declination as well too, so it wins on elevation. Clearly the winner. However, like many a war, take Russia-Ukraine right now, for instance, there is, great damage on both sides. And in a way, both parties lose. So in this case, Venus and Mercury will both suffer through their planetary war. And this is a natal condition which can go on for life in many ways. Of course, it becomes, epitomized or brought to the surface during the conjoined periods of such planets, Mercury and Venus, or Venus-Mercury as the actual Dasha Bhukti has played out, can cause what? Well, in the 8th house, dislocations, accidents, injuries, scandals of some sort or another, great irregularities. And this is all the more potent for him because Venus is the lagnesh, the ascendant lord. And in the 8th house, it's quite problematic. Incidentally, I'm not going to show this here, but in the Navamsha, that Venus-Mercury conjunction is in the 8th house of his Navamsha as well. And then that becomes particularly problematic in terms of personal relationships, irrespective of what it might do in the larger realm of, public function. Okay, so here's the thing: a severely, a weak and afflicted moon becomes a sort of an Achilles heel, and the whole realm of relationships and alliances, becomes a bit questionable. And the planetary war in the 8th house is also a bit of a sore spot. Now, notwithstanding those observations, Mercury and Venus still do form a couple of good yogas. For instance, Venus as lagnesh combining with Mercury, Lord of the Fifth, is one of the Dharma Karma Adipati yogas. That's quite productive, and it can make for, a clever mind. It also creates, sort of an affinity between the self and the fifth, ministerial roles, management of a portfolio. It's one of the other signatures we look for in terms of political promise of some kind. So that's all well and good. And the fact that it's in the 8th house, just means he has to stick handle his way through, difficult situations, which, he has been doing. Mercury is also the Lord of the second. So Venus as Lord of the first and Mercury Lord of the second combine to form Dana Yoga as well too. And located in the 8th house might simply indicate, beneficiary of, estates, insurance payouts, or any number of other scenarios in which a politician could gain money from others. Well, it's well known that, politicians, for the most part, exist because they have patronage from, well-heeled supporters. And so that's not anything out of the ordinary. The entire House of Democrats benefits in the same way. Okay, so no blame, no shame. All this to say, though, there is this planetary war which hovers over him, and he will have to deal with again and again because it's a natal circumstance. And regardless of what dasha he is in, there will be a bhukti of Mercury or a bhukti of Venus, which sort of brings all of this back as an issue. Now, for instance, he is about to go into, well, he's been in Sandasha since something like 2018 or so. Now, under the principles of Krishnamurti Padati, it is said that a Dasha Lord will principally give the results of its nakshatra dispositor, aka its star lord. Now, if you look at the sun and you see it's in an earth sign, between 10 and 2320 of an earth sign is a moon nakshatra. I don't even need to know the name of the nakshatra. I just need to know that it's ruled by the moon. Therefore, during the sun dasha, it will give results principally for the moon. Well, all well and good, except this moon is the weakest and most afflicted planet in the chart. Graha is the word I should use. So this sort of sets up a scenario where the whole of 2018 to 2024, the period for the 6-year period of the Sun Dasha, will be, characterized by, maybe difficult relationships, dodgy alliances, difficult negotiations, strange bedfellows. Has this played out since 2018? McCarthy has pretty much been in thrall to Donald Trump and the whole MAGA, world that has literally hijacked the Republican agenda. So, strange bedfellows indeed. Moon on the Rahu Ketu axis makes for some peculiar associates as well too. So my point is the Sun Dasha, giving the results for its star lord, the moon, brings all of that out of the woodwork. Now, in April, he will go into the Venus bhukti of the Sun Dasha. Well, Venus is his lagnesh. It's an indicator of name and fame and reputation and all the rest of that. And it's in a planetary war in the 8th house. Well, what could possibly go wrong? Well, for a year, we're going to have, ample opportunity to find out. And I would expect that there will be issues. For instance, in his protracted negotiations and deal making in order to secure the Speaker of the House role, McCarthy had to make a lot of concessions to the most extreme elements of the Republican Party. One of those is that any single member can put forward a petition to have a vote to reconfirm the status of the Speaker of the House. So in effect, this makes him hostage to the most radical elements of the party. It's going to be a very, very tenuous hold on the Speaker's gavel. And this goes on for a whole year, from April of 2023 until the following year. So look out, stormy waters ahead, I would say. Okay, I've got one more thing to say about his chart, but just take note, Saturn very powerful in the 10th, Moon very weak in the 7th, and I'll speak to an aspect of that in the outro part of this video. Okay, the only thing I wanted to say to wrap up with Kevin McCarthy's chart, and the reason why I left it till the end, was because in a way it's not pure Jyotish. It's sort of a concept from Western astrology, but it's of interest, and of course it applies to his horoscope with some significance. So that is that Saturn going imminently into Aquarius, sidereal Aquarius, of course, sets up the prospect that Kevin McCarthy will this year experience his second Saturn return. Now, the reason I've, sort of bookended my talk with this is because, Vedic astrologers are not, quite as obsessed with the whole notion of Saturn return as Western astrologers are, and yet, it's significant to consider. So it happens for all of us, between the age of 58 and 60, thereabouts. It all depends where Saturn is and whether it's direct or forward motion at birth, and when it can actually get back to its natal position. So anyway, visualize that chart and you can reflect back on it at your leisure. Saturn returns to its natal position in the 10th house where it is strong, where it originally formed Sasha Yoga. And Saturn in the 10th house, very generically can indicate someone, who has to, exhibit discipline, hard work, experience the hard grind and the slow climb to the top. We sort of think of the parable of the tortoise and the hare. Slow and steady wins the race and gets you there. A long climb up the hill to get to the top of the mountain, and so a certain assumption of power, all of which has taken place. And yet Saturn in the 10th house too can also suggest a fall from grace. Well, for him at least, his Saturn is very powerful too, so we may not expect it to be disastrous, but problematic, yes. And here's why. Saturn, upon its return to its own place, it basically duplicates the natal condition, because Saturn by transit is now in the 10th house, and it is once again aspecting that very fragile moon in the 7th house, which natally is in a state of jeopardy, being both weak and significantly afflicted. And now the transiting Saturn will basically echo that entire natal setup and create scenarios that will put this to the test. So that combination of running Sun Dasha, which evokes a weak moon, a Sun-Venus period running April 2023 until the following spring, which evokes the Venus involved in graha yuddha. These two things together, and now, as a kind of a trigger, the transiting Saturn, leaning its weight upon that fragile moon again, will put many of these relationships, alliances, strange bedfellows under a microscope. And so going forward in this year, McCarthy will have a thankless role. I believe in some respects he will be fighting something of a rear guard action against, the fifth column in his own party. But as the French say, vive la guerre. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See you later.